Welcome to the chapter 23 of the discussion today, which is on change and innovation. In this chapter, we are going to learn about what is change, what are the targets of organizational change, types of changes in the organization, change management, learning principles in change management, managing planned change, what are the change agents, models for managing organizational change, forces for change, resistance to organizational change, diagnosis of a problem, selection of appropriate methods, under which we will learn about the structural approaches, task and technology approaches, human asset approaches, multifaceted approaches. We will also learn about the impediments and limiting conditions of change, how to implement the method of change and evaluate the program effectiveness. We will also try to visit some of the contemporary change issues for today's managers and like stimulating innovation, creating a learning organization and understanding the relationship of culture and change. So, to begin with, what is the process of organizational change? It is like the change is a process by which we move from the current state of being that we are in to a future state of being in which some value addition is there. So, where we have improved and we have moved a state to a step which is like a step forward towards the goal that we want to attain for the organization. So, it is a moving forward from our present state of being to a desired state of being, and that process is called change. And when we take it in the context of organization, we tell it is organizational change and it helps in increasing the increasing our values in terms of improved ways of accessing the and utilizing the resources that we have at hand, the services of people, improved human resources, and how to know about their potential and utilize it for the better performance of the organization, and it adds to an organization's capability of creating value. So, this whole process is called organizational change. Now, when we can classify the changes taking place either in the human being, or which you call changes in the human resources, or in the functional aspect of the thing, functional resources. So, when you are talking of changes in the human resources, it is mainly focused towards increasing the capability of the people, then understanding their potential, developing their competencies, and motivating them through a change in the cultural values, multicultural. If we are in a multicultural setup, trying to motivate these people through changes in some norms and values, then investment by the organization in training and development programs, so that the potential of the people can be increased, their competencies can be increased. So, socializing employees into the organizational system, so that they get to know the organizational system in a better way, and sometimes changing the composition of the top management team, which helps to change the vision that the people the organization have about the human beings, human resources and their utilization, and thus changes are brought about in the organization. So, these are some of the changes which are brought about in the organization for better development of the human resources. When we are talking of changes with respect to like functional resources, then it is a change that is brought about by transferring the resources to the system where it is most needed, most valued based on the demands of the situation, demands from the environment, then demands which have resulted from environmental changes, and the resources are transferred to that. Then functional values can be, resources values can be increased also by bringing in changes in the structure, technology and culture and technology of the organization, so that functions, all the functions that we have discussed earlier of like management can be improved, and we can utilize the resource in a better way. When we are talking of technological changes, technological changes are changes brought about by efforts which are intended to give the organization an effort which is taken to give the organization, to develop in the organization the capacity to change itself by in order to exploit the market opportunities which are there, and by adoption and use of new technologies which are present, and developing new products and technologies, and like or changing the some aspects of the existing one, and gaining into the technological capabilities as one of the core competencies of the organization. This is the way like which like technology can bring in the technological capabilities, and the changes related to it can be brought about in the organization. Next, when we move to like the organizational capabilities changes, it includes like the changing of the organizational design, changing of the culture and structure, changing the strategy of the organization, and changes that may permeate the entire organization. If these changes are brought about, then these are called like changes in the capability of the organization itself. So, types of changes in the organization can be classified into two aspects. One is called the evolutionary change and the other is called the revolutionary change. In evolutionary change, what happens, this is a gradual change, slow change, which is focused towards a narrow aspect of the thing, and you to maintain equilibrium, and day-to-day processes are maintained, and it is brought through normal changes in the structure and management practices and technology. So, it is a very gradual change which helps in the maintaining of the equilibrium of the organization. When we are talking of revolutionary change, these are sudden changes that happen based on sudden demands arising from the environment, and maybe we have to meet those demands, otherwise like our survival sometimes becomes at stake. So, and which is like not broadly focused, narrowly focused, but it's very broadly focused, and it involves some breakthrough burst. It's like breakthrough technology sort of thing, new innovations coming out, all these new product development, new technology development, and which creates a new market sort of thing. These type of changes are called revolutionary changes. We can classify the developments in the evolutionary and the revolutionary changes. Now, when we are talking of evolutionary changes or day-to-day changes which helps to maintain the equilibrium of the organization, the theories which are guiding these type of changes are like socio-technical theories, which is like the which deals with the changing role of the people within the organization and getting them adjusted with the organization's vision and mission, so that both the employees and the organization grow together. So that part of the system, this type of bonding and mutual change is called socio-technical theory of change, where that the importance of the changing role and relationships and the technical relationships in order to increase the organizational efficiency. Next is another type of evolutionary change that we generally deal with are called processes of total quality management. So, in which like we talk of quality circles which are formed to check into the quality of the things that is produced, where the workers meet together to analyze what work is to be performed in what way, how to maintain the quality of those things. So, or to discuss about new ways of doing things. And next is like another is flexible work groups and work teams, where people are who assume these are people who assume responsibility by performing operations necessary for completing the task at hand and bringing in the final like for they perform at a particular stage in the process of like when the whole thing is getting developed. So, and they are these flexible work teams, they enter at a certain point of the product development and give shape to the when there is complexity of the work that is done, and they enter at a specific stage of the manufacturing process. And the flexible work teams also take responsibility of the TQM processes. So, quality circles, flexible work teams, these are two examples of evolutionary processes of change. We have examples of revolutionary processes of change also, in which we have like examples of like that of re-engineering and your like re-engineering, e-engineering, restructuring, downsizing. These are examples of like when you're talking of revolutionary changes. So, when we're talking of re-engineering, re-engineering involves rethinking and redesigning business processes to increase organizational effectiveness. So, So instead of focusing on the organization's functions, they focus on the managers focus on the business processes and how to like change it so that it becomes more effective. So business process is an activity which cross across functional boundaries and so that which is vital for it cuts across all the functional lines so that it becomes important for quick delivery of the goods when it is required. The guidelines for re-engineering are like we should first try to organize around the outcomes and not the task, like what we have to deliver, that should be the first thing that we should focus on, and then what we have to deliver and when, and then we will try to map other things to it. Then have those who use the output of the process perform the process. So, if somebody is concerned with the output of the process, it's involve them in the making of the process also, so that they know how to do it and at what time it is like how it is done properly. Decentralization of the decision making process at the point where decisions are to be finally made. So, that is another point of re-engineering, like decentralize it to the extent like decisions are made at the exact point where decisions required to be made. These are the three parts of like essentials of proper re-engineering. When you are talking of e-engineering, it is the company's attempts to use information system to improve their performance. When you are talking of restructuring, it is the changing of the task and the authority relationship and redesigning organizational structure and culture to increase organizational effectiveness. When it is downsizing, it is the process of streamlining the organizational hierarchy and laying off managers and members and workers so that to reduce the bureaucratic cost. And innovation is the process by which the organization used to their skills and resources to like to develop new goods and services or to develop new products and operating systems so that they can better respond to the needs of the customers. So, these are the two examples of like when we are talking of the developments of the evolutionary change and the revolutionary change. Next, what we will come to discuss is about the change management, how change is managed. It's not only important to design like what is the change and how the change is to be like whether it's a revolutionary or evolutionary change. The most important part of bringing in change in the organization is having a proper change management process, so that you have a smooth introduction of the change, acceptance of the change by the employees, and also the smooth acceptance of the change and implementation of the change process in the ultimate implementation of the change process in the organization. So, first we will try to focus into some of the change management process and what route people take in to introduce the changes in the organization. So, first route that is taken in like generally like it's management of change through power. In this, what happens in like we forcefully try to introduce some change in the organization because some top management is higher in power hierarchy. What they may try to do is forcefully introduce the change in the organization by virtue of the power position that they are in the organization, and other people have to accept the change. They may not identify with the change, they may be uncomfortable with the change that's been introduced, but they have to accept the change because it's been introduced so it's been forcefully introduced. Next way of introducing change in the organization is introducing change or managing change through reason. Here what's the route taken is the change processes are discussed, like what will happen after change, the outcome of the change, and the process of the change is discussed with the people who will be affected by the change based on some logical thinking and reasoning, and it's to introduce the topic to them and we think like this rational discussion with them is going to make them logically reason the pros and cons of the change process and accept the change because it's been through well reasoned process that we have discussed. This route is called managing change through reasons. And another route is through managing change through re-education, where it has happened. Here what is done, next process of managing change is through the process of re-education. Here what we may find is that either in the process of power or in the process of rational approach to change, what may happen, like in power we do not consult the people and we do not try to take their views into consideration, and we forcefully try to introduce the change in the organization. When we are talking of the rational ways of introducing change in the organization, what we try to focus on or what we try to depend on is people making rational choices, and by dealing with the alternatives, knowing the information in details, they can make rational choices and decide on how to go for the change and accept it or not. But these rational choices are sometimes colored by the people's value system, interest levels and all these things, and rational thought process may be clouded. People's rational thought process may be clouded by these factors. So what is the other next technique, which is the middle of the path sort of technique, which is called introducing change through re-education. Like we try to introduce change by bringing in some changes in the people's thought process, value system, ways of thinking, ways of looking at certain things, and they try to introduce the change slowly in the organization. So these are three major ways of introducing change in the organization. The learning principle in change management are like, first we have to unfreeze the old learning which is there, and by introducing new materials, maybe introducing a cognitive dissonance where people try to think things in a different way, and then after that unfreezing, that moving people away from the status quo and introducing this dissonance and making them think differently, like so that next process is like we try to introduce the change, we try to introduce the new learning, so motivate for this new learning, and then after that process is over, we try to see whether then rephrasing that change through the process of practice and orientation, the new learning is getting ingrained in the people, and it's stabilizing. So, these are the three processes of unfreezing, then introduction of the learning or the change phase, and the third is the refreezing stage. So, refreezing the learned behavior. There could be like ways of managing a change which is planned in nature. When a change is planned in nature, so these are activities which are planned beforehand, so that we know like we have to reach a goal, and how to reach the goal through certain changes is what is known as planned changes through certain new processes of doing things. This part is called planned change. Now, goals of planned change are to improve the ability of the organization to adapt to changes in the environment, and changing the behavior of the people within the organization. These are the two processes of planned change. Now, we have 8 steps given by Cotter to for like how to implement change in the organization. We will try to look into these 8 steps given by Cotter. The 8 steps are as follows, like establishing a sense of urgency by creating a compelling reason for why the change is needed, forming a coalition with enough power to lead the change, creating a new vision to direct the change and strategies for achieving the vision, communicating the vision throughout the organization, and next is empowering others to act on the vision by removing barriers to change and encouraging the risk taking and problem solving, creative problem solving, planning for creating reward short term wins that move the organization towards the vision, consolidating improvements, reassess changes and make necessary adjustments in the new programs, reinforcing the changes by demonstrating the relationship between new behaviors and the organization success. So, all these things like these 8 steps again you can arrange into the unfreezing, the learning phase and the refreezing stage. Like when you are moving towards the first few steps are for the unfreezing stage, where you are trying to create the urgency of by creating a compelling reason for why the change is required, or forming a coalition with enough power to lead the change. These are the these are the unfreezing state. Now, when you are communicating vision through the organization or are empowering others to act on the vision by removing barriers, this is how like you are learning through models, role models, and you are learning through your peers, and so that is the learning phase, like how you want the learning about the organizational change that you want to introduce is going to be like known to the people for whom the change is directed. And last is the when you are talking of consolidating improvements, planning for creating a reward system, reinforcing the changes. This is again the steps taken for refreezing the change process. So, these are the 8 steps for implementing change. Now, one of the key roles played for implementation of change process in the organization are the role played by the change agents. Now, change agents are persons who act as catalyst and assume the role responsibility for managing change activities in the organization. So, a change agent can bring a new viewpoint in the organization and which the manager was not able to see and introduce it to a particular situation. So, one of the key major role is played by the change agents while we are talking of implementing changes in the organization. Now, there are two types of change agents. One group is called the external change agents and the others are internal change agents. External change agents are agents who are coming to the organization from outside, and internal change agents are people who are present within the organization and they are participating in the change process. Now, both the change agents, whether they are external in nature or whether they are internal in nature, like introduction of change agents either external or internal, have its pros and cons for the organization, and we will try to discuss these two things separately over here. And when you are talking of external change agents, these are change agents who are maybe temporary employees of the organization or could be external consultants also, who are brought in to the organization like for introducing and implementing changes in a particular changes in the organization. So, they could be university professors, they could be private consultants, they could be experts, they could be like these type of people who have considerable knowledge about the subject matter. Or they could be like temporary employees who are brought in for the organization for a particular time only during the change process. Next is they have generally a good level of learning in this area, in the sense they know they are expert in the area and they can introduce the change. So, they provide the perspective, like as an outsider what they can do, they can look at the situation prevailing in the organization in a more objective unbiased way, rather than insiders who are like being insiders develop some sort of identity with the organization, and when it comes to critically evaluate the performance of the organization, sometimes insiders are not able to look at the organization in that unbiased way and give a critical interpretation of the facts and functions and suggest where changes are required and what way it should be done. But being externals who are not so much emotionally attached or having other like bindings in the organization, they can evaluate the organization in a more critical way and by unbiased way and try to suggest the improvements required for its better performance. So, these are the positive aspects when you are talking of introducing change through external agents. But again it has got some criticism in the sense like some insiders they suggest, because they come from outside and they do not know what is the exact need of the organization and how it is functioning and what it will like how it is functioning, then maybe it's not proper to judge only from outside and tell like this is the prescription required for you. Only an insider who has been there in the organization and interacted with the organization knows the organization fully well, he is in a position to suggest like what is needed for the organization for its improvement. That is the criticism that is faced when we are talking about the role of external change agents in like bringing in organizational changes. Another group of change agents that we have is called internal change agents. Internal change agents are individuals who like works in the organization and who have the necessary information for understanding the problem at hand, and they try to identify the pockets where changes are required. And these people could be like a new manager who is appointed and who is given the role of finding out how changes can be brought in the organization. So, and how what can be done to improve the present negative situations present in the organization. Sometimes difficulties faced by these internal change agents are that due to the fact like they identify with the organization so much, like they are sometimes not able to see the problems, or sometimes they overlook the problems also. And if they want to introduce certain changes and they are somewhere placed in the like middle of the hierarchy, and they may find difficulty in the change getting introduced if it is not wholeheartedly supported by the top management, because if it is required that the people in the whole up and down chain requires to change, then the status of that particular change agent in the organization, in the whole organizational setup, like the hierarchy, he or she may find it difficult for making people accept his suggestions or her suggestions and agree to like the things to be done, if not that change agent is given complete freedom, support and like encouragement by the top management, and a trust is there on the change agent. So, these could be the possible difficulties, and biases could be like some of the and the proof of this, whether this progress can be slow, because as we discussed there are some barriers in accepting the suggestions from internal people, and people may think like they are more biased towards one of the departments or towards some people of the organization. So, these again could be hindrances of like the having only internal people as change agents. And another possibility is that like when we are having internals only as change agents, like sometimes we do not get new ways of doing things. Possibility could be like when externals are coming in, specifically from other organizations, other setups, we get like different ways of functioning, which can be like analogy can be drawn from those settings, and we try to see whether it is working in this our own particular setting or not. But when it is like the internals or the change agents, sometimes we miss on those experiences of the external change agents. So, what is done particularly is to take a team approach of both external and internal change agents, where like there is a team approach. We used to intervene and develop the program which is both the internal and the external change agents, but it's rare. But if we have these type of teams, it seems to have the greatest chance for success, because changes are more successful when we have these type of teams. So, what are the key management responsibilities as far as change is concerned? Is managers assume like the forces for change are continuously acting on the organization. The managers must sort out the information that reflects the magnitude of change, and it forces to recognize when change is needed. When malfunction is recognized, managers must diagnose the problem and identify relevant alternative techniques. Managers must implement change and monitor results. So, we can understand the key responsibilities of the managers are to like help change happen and find out, to take it for granted like change is inevitable, like, and it is continuously acting on the organization, and if the organization has to survive, then it has to adapt to the changes, or in other words maybe introduce some new changes itself. So, based on that assumption, the manager has to seek information, sort out information which reflects the magnitude of the change forces, which is to be answered first, and when there is a problem, what is the problem in the organization, and identify the alternative solutions and introduce change and monitor the results. So, these are manager himself or herself has to function as a change agent. Next, we look on to the steps for managing organizational change, and there are few steps, 6 to 7 steps of managing organizational change. The first step for managing organizational change are understanding the forces of change. And here what we understand is that living in 3-step change model, there are 2 oppositely acting forces within an organization. One which is like forces for change, and the another oppositely acting force are forces making organizations resistant to change. So, when both these 2 forces, like forces for change and forces against change, are balanced with each other, the organization is in a state of inertia. So, to introduce change in the organization, managers might either increase the forces for change or reduce the forces which are resistant to change. The forces which are for change are some of the external forces which are beyond management's control. Are 3 types of external changes, like marketplace change in the competitors' actions, introduction of new products, etc. Technological changes, especially in the production technology, and social and political changes, changes in the business government relationship, international markets, etc. Others are like competitive forces, which are organization must make changes to attempt to match or exceed its competitors, either in terms of efficiency, quality, innovation, or responsiveness to customers. The economic, political and global forces affect organizations by forcing them to change how they and where they produce goods and services. So, here the answer is like the organizational structure has to be changed to allow expansion in foreign markets. Sometimes the culture of the organization has to be changed because you start functioning in different national cultures, and help expatriates to adapt to the cultural changes, values of where they are located. There could be changes in the demographics of the workforce and changes in the composition of the workforce and diversity of employees, and here the organization may find it difficult to manage such a diversity if it is not ready for it, and there is an increased need to manage diversity in the organization. So, to introduce proper jobs for them, to take care of their personal needs, to take care of their cultural differences, to have a career path for them. So, and to have a proper plan of managing diversity within the organization. The ethical forces present are like these are important for organizations to take steps to promote ethical behavior, like introducing the post of an ethics officer, promoting employees to report unethical behavior. These could be certain of the steps taken by the organization. Boundary functions are organizations' methods for bridging the gap between external forces and organization's unit, and the boundary roles must sense changes in the external environment. These roles are there. These are called boundary roles, and they try to report it back to the organization, and so that the organization becomes ready for the upcoming changes in the external environment. Resistance to change in the organization are like under the situations where change is based for the organization, sometimes there is a fear, anxiety and resistance which lowers the organization's effectiveness and reduces its chances of survival. So, forms of resistance to change could be overt and immediate, like voicing of complaints, engaging in job actions, and implicit or deferred, like loss of employee loyalty and motivation, increased errors or mistakes, increased absenteeism and so on and so forth. So, there could be like resistance to change at different levels, like resistance to change at the individual level, resistance to change at the group level. And what we see over here is at the individual level, the sources of resistance to change are the cognitive biases, the uncertainty and insecurity people feel from these changes that are to be brought in, and due to the selective perception and retention they are not able to interpret the change properly, and for some people it is very habitual act to resist to anything that is suggested. So, these could be the sources of individual resistance to change. Sources of group level resistance to change are the group norms, cohesiveness and groupthink and escalation of commitment. These could be barriers to introduction of new changes in the organization. Some group norms are so strict, like they won't allow outside information to flow in to disturb the status quo of the group. The pressure of the group, the pressure of majority of the group and how they think may color the group's decision making, and group's initial level of decision making may affect the decision making at the other stages. So, these processes are called groupthink and escalation of commitment. Sources of functional level resistance to change are like differences in subunit orientation and power and conflict situations present within the departments, in terms of like sharing of the resources. And sources of organizational resistance to change are structure, culture, and the strategy of the organization, like mechanistic structure, very rigid culture in which, or a bureaucratic organization in nature, or like which is like strategy taken by the organization it's too much rigid and less of flexibility. All these things will define the organization sources of resistance to change. Strategies for overcoming resistance to change are like, there must be a reason to change. So, we have to make people understand that reason, then like involve more people in the total plan, communicate on an ongoing basis, and create a learning organization through open discussion, clear vision, strong emphasis on interdependence, clear goals and concept of performance expectations, commitment to learning, improving personal growth, curiosity to try for new methods, experiment and accept failure, like concern for measurable results wherever possible. See, acceptance of failure is one of the important points, like if we are to introduce change, because people resist to change mostly because we do not want to see failures, and because we have been like accustomed to see success only, and that is why we do not want to take risk or see the unforeseen part of the thing, like what will happen after change, what will happen if this is not going to succeed, is the question which we face while introducing changes. What if this process is not going to work? So, acceptance of failure is one of the learning that people have to have, so that they become more open to change. Next, we have some tactics of introducing change. So, tactics of dealing with change, these tactics are like proper education and communication that has to be done, participation, then facilitation and support, negotiation, negotiating with the people like about the processes, and then co-option, like setting of a mutual goal and setting targets in such a way, like people have to communicate with each other, they bring in their own views and try to share responsibilities with each other. As a result, changes are brought in the initial way of doing things and help in reducing the conflict. Next is selecting people who accept change and introducing change through them, and the last process of course is change through like dealing with the resistance to change through the process of coercion. These could be the possible processes. So, after dealing with these tactics for resistance to change, we are to deal with the other few steps of change processes, like diagnosing, how to diagnose the problem, then how to select the appropriate methods, how to what are the appropriate method, which method is appropriate for which purpose, and we have to see some of the limitations of introducing change, impediments, barriers to introducing change. We have to take up the course of as a discussion how to implement change in the proper way. Then what are the recent trends, and like when you are talking of innovation, and what are the responsibilities of the organizations regarding this. This whole set of discussion we will take up in the next lecture. Thank you.